And we are live on YouTube. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to the next anti-spy bill event. This is our third event now in this series, and I'm really pleased that today we have with us Cian Westmoreland, who is one of the amazing drone whistleblowers. Live on YouTube. No, just pause my YouTube. Sorry for that. Cian is one of the amazing drone whistleblowers who has been speaking out about what is really happening within the drone program. He has testified in Europe on behalf of a group. There is a group of whistleblowers that have also testified with him in Europe. He has been working with people who are affiliated with the Cres Foundation, and he's been speaking on media worldwide about what's really been going on in these really illegal drone wars around the world. So today he's joining Internet Party to tell New Zealand for the first time a bit more about the role of the Five Eyes nations in these drone wars, which are now going on in more than half a dozen countries worldwide. So in the last few years, we have seen the drone papers come out in The Intercept, and we are slowly learning more about what is really happening. So I'd just like to introduce now to you guys Cian, and he's got 20 minutes or so to tell us his story about what led him to whistleblow, what he's learned, and what the public really needs to hear about what has been going on. Cian, go for it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I guess I'll just get down to it. I went to Afghanistan in 2009 with a squadron called the 73rd Expeditionary Air Control Squadron. The thing that people have it's kind of hard to explain the drone program because it's really tied very much into the global surveillance system. So it's not necessarily just a pilot and a sensor operator sitting in Creech Air Force Base in Nevada shooting at people halfway around the world. There's an entire infrastructure in between, and this infrastructure actually is situated in multiple countries around the world, to include Australia with Pine Gap, who has been assisting with geolocation and targeting, like with cell phones. Germany is another one. It's a really important signal relay station. They have they've got some processing information or some processing capabilities that I can't really go too much into. England, and then Italy, all of these countries have very vital parts in the drone program. Maybe not with personnel necessarily, but with the land that they give, the signals that they're relaying and whatnot. And the really important thing to understand about drones is that it's a network-dependent weapon system. So everything depends on this vast network that's operating. One of the things that really kind of got me talking was that I received a report at the end of my tour saying that I assisted in 200 plus enemy kills with the system that I helped set up, and 2,400 close air support missions. A few months after I was there was something that came out that said there was 1,050 unmanned aerial support missions. And we weren't privy to the civilian casualties or the collateral damage that occurred through us. We weren't allowed access to that information, just in the same way that many of the people at Pine Gap aren't actually offered the full picture of the end result of what their work is actually doing. and nor the methodologies and everything that go into the strike. So one of the arguments that I've kind of been putting forward is that it is a highly compartmentalized way of war. It requires the activities of multiple people, dozens, if not, well, up to 180 people around the world doing their jobs in order for a drone to be able to fly over a country and actually surveil, determine a target, and then take out that target. So in a lot of ways, it's very convoluted, and in a lot of ways, the responsibility for killing is diffused across multiple individuals. So you have a pilot who's actually administering the strike, but he's not developing the intel reports. He's not the one, taking all of this cell phone metadata and looking at it and figuring out, if this is the person that they're intending to target. And it's, in my opinion, I think it's very problematic, more so that we're moving towards automation and we're using, hold on, that we're using artificial intelligence and to with a lot of help from, hold on real quick. Everybody's tweeting and it's vibrating my phone. Okay, I put it on nighttime mode. So one of the things that I was really trying to, not only Pine Gap, but I've been speaking about Ramstein as well, is that there's some cats killing each other outside. Each country that is helping is equally complicit with the end result, and therefore it's up to the populations of those countries, as well as the politicians that they elect, to ensure that they are abiding by their own constitutional laws, as well as a lot of countries, to include Australia, is very much tied to international laws. So it's a very real possibility that Australia is involved in potential war crimes. Of course, they're following the lead of the United States, so the United States is they're not too concerned with that. But it's definitely something to think about, especially when we're trying to figure out how to somewhere down the road try to find the global governance of this types of technology. So something interesting just kind of came out, interesting / terrifying, in 60 Minutes here in the US. They started talking about swarm robotics. So they're basically developing the ability to do distributed battle management, distributed. They instead of having one camera on the target, they have 100. And the way that it's being used, some of these commercial drones are being used in places like ISIS controlled territories and Raqqa and everything, is that they're taking these DJI Phantoms and they're using them to essentially just drop bombs on people. So there's a very real possibility that these swarm robotics could eventually evolve into like flying minefields. and they would work in tandem with other networked aircraft. So, for instance, the F-18, in some of these videos, they've been actually dropping these little drones called Paradixes, and it's I would recommend anybody to look that up because it's pretty terrifying. It sounds like a plague of locusts, and when you really consider that these things could be flying over people's cities and whatnot, it's I mean, drones in themselves are kind of a weapon of terror, in the sense that, you know, you have villagers sitting there, they're hearing about these drone strikes all over the country. Maybe somebody in their town was struck, and answers aren't being provided to people as to why they're being struck. Um, and sometimes mistakes do occur, and you know, it's bad enough when you have somebody in an aircraft actually flying over. It kind of adds insult to injury that people that they see that the United States and coalition partners who are involved don't have the courage to actually send people themselves. So it's not only become a weapon that's terrifying, it's also been viewed as sort of a cowardly weapon. And I did just spend some time in Standing Rock last year. I went there with the understanding that that North Dakota was actually the first state to legalize weaponized drones. So I was expecting to possibly see police using it with tear gas attachments, or maybe like beanbag shooters or something like that. So more and more you're going to be seeing drones in domestic policing, and the way that it was used at Standing Rock was to fly over the encampments. They were using aircraft with IMSI catchers, so they're looking for cell phone numbers. They're catching all of these so the cell phone data that's coming up, it's acting as like a false cell phone tower, and a lot of people were reporting their signal coming in and out and boosting whenever the aircraft were overhead. They actually had a fusion cell at the end of the road with facial recognition cameras, and they were basically pointed at the driver's side window. You know, whenever people came past, they would detect people's faces. They monitored everybody who was in the social movement. And that was out in North Dakota. Like, if it's happening in a city, you probably wouldn't even see some of that stuff because you have security cameras everywhere doing the same thing. So I guess it's just, you know, the idea of smart cities is kind of disturbing to me. This idea that you have cameras with, you know, the help of algorithms monitoring traffic flows and everything like that, you know, snapping photos of license plates and all that. I mean, it definitely helps things run smoother, but at the same time, all of this stuff is being built on surveillance technology. And our cell phones are perfect examples. We're targeting people on their cell phones. We're basically, you know, with the IMSI catchers and the drone program, they're called Gilgamesh pods. So what they're doing is they're flying around, acting as false towers and taking in numbers, and that's being cross-referenced with other forms of intelligence. So say an intel analyst would actually be looking at a series of screens with a team, and they would be looking at pictures of targets that they were, you know, searching for, sometimes retroactively. So everything that's going online is going to these giant data centers. It's being stored and could be potentially used against us in the future. And so this, like the visual intelligence is being overlaid with signals intelligence and geospatial and human intelligence. And at the end of it, it's all guesswork. So in these countries that we've been fighting, these are typically weapon systems that would work better with more data. So if they were to, say, target a Western country, well, we're a very data-rich society, so finding pictures of people on Facebook would be really easy. Over there, it's not so much the case. A lot of these people, they don't know when they were born. A lot of them don't actually have family photos of themselves. And when you're hearing the rhetoric coming from Washington saying that we have perfect like facial recognition and everything, I mean, they don't really talk about what the capabilities of the cameras are flying at 14,000 feet. They're saying that they measure the distance between pupils, and certain people, like everybody has a very specific distance, and it's foolproof. They're also looking for body shape and everything like that. But as far as the pupil thing, like that argument's out the window when you're monitoring people from that height, because you have to factor in atmospheric things. Like you're often flying these things in really dusty countries. You're also having to factor in data loss, because as things are getting passed through different pieces of equipment around the world, the quality degrades. I don't know what it's at right now, but I know that's it was at around a 4-second delay. That's why they require people on the ground to actually help with launch and recovery of drones. So they need to be in there at the airfield in order to control them through radio signal rather than satellite. So once they get up to cruising altitude, you're going from satellite. And the reason why that doesn't necessarily work with satellite is because of that time lag. So the people who are sitting in these boxes in the United States, analyzing and also basically preparing to shoot, are not seeing what is happening on the ground in real time. It's near real time. It's usually second, 2 seconds, sometimes up to 4, depending on what's happening, in the atmosphere, and what's like, if the equipment's glitching out. So, I mean, some very real problems. It's still a program in development. It's being cast as something that is a lot more technologically advanced than it is, which is problematic when you're trying to figure out, if they're targeting the right people or not. It's also problematic because it's a weapon that, it's been used, I would say abused, in the past, because it's very easy, and for a politician to basically show that he's doing something, he's taking out bad guys. But every single time a civilian is killed with these systems, every time somebody who is innocent or the people around them don't know is guilty, it creates potential enemies. So it's kind of touted as this thing that's able to take out people in a really targeted way, but in fact, it's possible that it's creating more enemies than it's killing, and that's just partly because of the the very nature of it. I mean, I know, like I heard the old adage of the Spartans didn't want to fight with bows and arrows because they felt like that was cowardly, whereas the Persians would. I think there's an element of that too. It's just it's a new way of fighting, and the U.S. government and particularly weapons contractors are trying to frame it in a way that you can be a warrior sitting, halfway around the world with no threat to yourself, actually fighting these wars. The problem is that, there's the problem with the fact that, in the process of taking out enemies and thinking you're actually doing something, you're not. I don't think that they're looking at as many alternative approaches. Personally, like, I don't think that you're going to win a war against an ideology by taking out more and more people, or just eliminating people in general. It requires an element of diplomacy, and I think that's been seriously lacking. I mean, our State Department, in my opinion, has been pretty underfunded. Like, we've got more people working on an aircraft carrier than like a single like Nimitz class aircraft carrier than we've had. Well, I wouldn't say more, but generally equivalent to every diplomat in the world. Imagine if that was kind of, and we have several aircraft carriers. So imagine if, we were to use that instead of the weapons themselves. So it's kind of a systemic problem, and it's just, in my opinion, it's exacerbated by having this new technology that everybody seems to love and want to play with. And it's not, we're not actually, hitting the root of the problem here. I mean, we're kind of having our foreign policy led by weapons manufacturers who are, have conflicts of interests in, perpetuating these wars and keeping them going. And then, of course, these our senior leadership is kind of, they're almost interchangeable with these weapons contractors. So even in that side, it's kind of undermined morally and ethically. So yeah, I mean, to link all those issues, but it's not gonna help anything with automation, and particularly in the news right now, you have people like Eric Prince who are, trying tooth and nail to become, the viceroy of Afghanistan. Having a private military contractor with these capabilities, which they're using Predators, they're using this technology. Having what people like that having capabilities like that with no accountability to a nation state is pretty dangerous as well, because it's essentially guns for hire, and what's more dangerous than guns for hire? And those guns happen to be killer robots. So these are conversations that they're actually having at the UN level. There is a campaign to stop killer robots, as sci-fi and funny as that sounds. Like, it's 2017, and this is something that is pretty much, you're going to start seeing these on the battlefield in the next 3 years. from what I remember, there was actually documents on the military. I think in 2021, the U.S. military was supposed to revise whether or not they would allow for autonomous weapon systems to make kill decisions. So maybe that can just sort of act as a pretext to this whole idea of privacy, because, you know, it's not, we're not just talking about, you know, them figuring out your porn habits here. We're, you know, this is, you know, there's people all over the world who are not only marginalized by, you know, the power structures that happen to be dominating right now, but there's also just people who are trying to, you know, maintain their own privacy for the sake of liberty, because privacy is something that I believe is very important in, you know, having liberty to make your own decisions. With social media, I mean, our data is being sucked up, monitored, and utilized later. I mean, you have the police forces in Vancouver, I believe, and Santa Barbara in California are using predictive policing to monitor their cities. So basically creates a heat map, and they go to wherever those wherever the hot zone is, and what the metrics are, I don't think they even understand, but they're going into these places and they're going in ready. And there is the possibility of confirmation bias. There's a possibility of groupthink, and, you know, we're all humans, and that doesn't go away when you start using artificial intelligence or you know, robots to do things. But that's what I got, and, you know, I'm happy to take any questions.
Sean, I'm going to just try and unpack that with you a bit. Because you've pretty much just covered a whole slew of topics that are related to not just internet party interests, but things that I've been studying and writing about for years and years now, and things that other whistleblowers have also been bringing information into the public realm about. So I think step one, as basic as it sounds and as obvious as it sounds, is probably to explain to people what drones are. We hear about flying killer robots, and I understand that that is in fact what they are. But can you give people a little bit more detailed explanation of the genesis of these drones, where they came from, what they were in phase one when they were just being used in one country, and then perhaps the evolution of them to what is being deployed now?
So drones more or less started in World War II. They've been used in the Israeli, the I think the 7-Day War. They've been used in Vietnam. Mostly it's to confuse missile defense systems so that it can get you know, other aircraft through. So they were remote control aircraft. And that was about it. They were basically remote control planes. But something changed whenever we started using satellites and we started attaching all of these sensors to them. And something definitely changed when we started attaching weapons to them. So the drone itself is really just a platform for sensors, and has communications equipment that connects it to the rest of the world. So I've heard of drones. I know another whistleblower, Lisa Ling, likes to explain drones like they are the mouse, whereas the DGS, distributed ground system, is the keyboard, and that's where you have all the you have analysts sitting and taking in this information, and they're deciphering it. So I guess if you want to look at a drone as like a giant mouse, and a wireless mouse for that matter, whereas the little sensor on the mouse is, you know, activated whenever you're moving across the mouse pad, just as the sensors are activated through like the cameras and the like the Gilgamesh pods, and yeah. So it's really just a platform. The drone you're seeing, the real weapon system it's a lot more complicated, but it's also very simple. So really, everything that Edward Snowden was talking about, everything that hackers have been talking about, with CCC and everything, they're looking at the surveillance components of it. They're looking at this massive communications part. But just imagine you have a global surveillance system that is capable of targeting and killing people without a human on the ground. So I don't know if I sort of like explain that in a way that's kind of understandable.
It's really exceptional, because I don't think that most people understand that drone technology was rooted in distant wars of the past, such as you're talking about World War One and about Vietnam. I don't think anyone considers drones to have existed prior to, like, say, 2001, 2002. So that is a really valid point, that this is a technology that has evolved over time.
Yeah.
And I think it's the weaponization of the unmanned aircraft, if I'm correct, that has evolved significantly in the 2000s.
So I believe in 2004 was when they actually started putting weapons on the drones. And the minute they started doing that, the mission changed. It used to be a surveillance platform, surveillance and reconnaissance platform. Once they did that, it just became a really easy way for people, commanders to kill people. It emboldens commanders, as another whistleblower said.
Right. So then the next question I had for you is what you've just covered a bit of, which is, what is the genesis of the US weaponized drones, and how has that developed, and how quickly has that developed? Like, where have we come to from 2004 to 2017?
So 2004, interestingly enough, the program to weaponize drones was called Big Safari. If you want to kind of go into like maybe the mindset that these people had, it was like akin to big game hunting. You can read books out there; they're relatively recent, where they're talking, about doing this, and the entire time they're comparing it to going after big game and whatnot. And in my opinion, that kind of skews it separates the person from their own humanity, from actually viewing these people on the ground as human beings. There's others who've spoken who said that they had to remind themselves that they were humans. You shouldn't have to remind yourself that people are humans, especially if you're not in harm's way and you're not having to protect yourself and the people next to you. So where it's sort of evolved is that it's become more and more automated. It's become the imagery quality has gotten better. The satellites have upgraded, so they're able to deal with more bandwidth, and the quote unquote enemy has evolved and gotten more intelligent about things. They found ways to foil the sensors, and yeah, so and they're becoming more networked, and they're becoming more autonomous, so to speak, and that happens incrementally over time. It's not just like today they're remote control airplanes, tomorrow they're flying killer robots. I mean, there's the element of people using it for capturing with special forces components on the ground. For as much as like I'm against the war on terror, like as a tool for that, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I definitely think we need to take the weapons off.
Okay, so how did you first get involved in the drone program?
It was kind of by accident. So I think a lot of people who are involved in the drone program don't even actually know that they're involved in the drone program. When I was in South Korea, I was basically, going around the country working on equipment up on top of mountains that the Koreans were maintaining, and this equipment was basically keeping the air picture up. I was working with the communications for U-2 spy planes, which was kind of the predecessor to the Predator. I mean, of course, you have a human on board, and there's less of a flight time, but you're able to control more sensors at the same time in a U-2 than you would be with, like, say, a Predator. And when I went to Germany, I don't think anybody actually really had an idea that we were going to be, relaying the communications for drones, but the battle management system and the people who are involved with that are all they're the people who move aircraft around the country whenever say a Marine unit is pinned down and they need to call in air assets. The battle manager would be the one that would take those take the orders and tell them where to go. So that's being automated. It's called distributed battle management. And as far as drones go, working with so I found out when I was in Afghanistan, is the long story short. I don't want to go into too much technical detail because I don't want to get into trouble. So.
No. Okay, so you talked about cell phones, and we know from the presidential kill list that actually on that kill list there were lists of cell phone numbers. And I have friends who are very serious activists, some of whom are in even more trouble than me, who refer to their cell phones colloquially as drone addresses. Those of them that haven't used cell phones, they actually say, "This is my drone address," and then give their phone number. And is this how we bring it home to people, that they understand that in some places in the world, a cell phone number is a drone address? It's by which you can be tracked and surveilled, but also possibly killed. I know that there was two quite famous cases of reporters, I think one of whom had actually interviewed Osama bin Laden, Middle Eastern reporters. Like one of them was like really high up, like, a head of news type. And it turned out that they had been added to the kill list. So is this what cell phones are? Is this what it means in the future to own a cell phone, is that you can it is in fact a drone address?
Well, the problem with like what you would call a signature strike is that it's not necessarily based on them knowing who exactly is down there, but the fact that somebody is within proximity and they're meeting with them on a regular basis. There's I mean, it's possible that that person would be viewed as guilty. It's like right after I met with a guy in the British Parliament at Westminster for the APPG on drones. He said that he was targeted 6 times, and funnily enough, like right after that, and when I was hopping on a plane to go to New York, I get quadruple S's on my ticket stub, saying that I was selected for extra searches. So proximity of cell phones is definitely one of the things that they look at, and if they're actually looking further into it, I mean, they might even like be able to tap the cell phone and listen in the conversations. Something funny about cell phones is that if they have SIM cards that can be removed, if they have things that they can interchange, it might throw things off. If they put all their cell phones in a big bowl and mix them up and then give them out to different people, that's another way that kind of throws things off. It's not foolproof. Like they've adopted countermeasures like that. And I'm sure that they've found ways to overcome some of those countermeasures, but if you need to bring that home, I think it's both a kind of I mean, I'm into dark humor, so it's a it's a good way of getting that across, calling it a drone address.
Unbelievable. And you talk about the enemy evolving, right? And this was originally supposed to be, this whole war was the war on terror was supposed to be about catching the people who were responsible for 9/11. But we're now 15, 16 years later, and we're still fighting this mysterious enemy. Who are they going after now? How has the concept of the enemy shifted?
Well, I know in Afghanistan, the Taliban is kind of this catch-all term. In reality, it's people from different tribes, different villages who, are just a little peeved at us being there, and they rally around this I guess the ideology that the Taliban offer, or ISIS or whatnot. And I think they partially do that because it's antithetical to everything the West sort of represents. So, I mean, when these people are thinking, they're joining this militant group, they're not. They're looking at the like that's how you convince people to do something. It's like, yeah, it sucks now, but once we have this Islamic State, up and operational, we have Sharia law and everything's good, and we're not being like influenced by the West, and we can die comfortably knowing that we're not living sinful lives or something. It's that's part of it. There's also just people who are just really sick of having foreigners occupy their countries. I mean, the whole thing with Iraq was just a huge like clusterfuck. I mean, we went in there. The media told us that, the media, and of course the executive branch told us that, we're going in there because they have weapons of mass destruction. It's an imminent threat to the United States. So we launch a preemptive strike, and then we find out there's no weapons of mass destruction. And then we need to find out why, and then Saddam Hussein dies. And of course it leaves a power vacuum, and all of these groups sort of coalesce there. And I mean, that one mistake is what led to all of this. And the threat, the threat to the United States, and I guess every country that is bandwagoning behind it, is grown, and it's spread across sub-Saharan Africa. And now they have drone missions flying out of Chad, out of Niger, out of Djibouti. and sometimes they're under the cover of looking for poachers, but I've never heard of, military assets being used to protect elephants. I mean, of course, they're used for other things too. I mean, they're up there. You don't know why they're up there, but they need a good story to tell the people in Africa and the people in the United States. So that's what they say. We're hunting poachers. But it's if you look behind that facade and a little bit more critically, like these things are spreading all over the globe. It's not only our country that's doing it. I presume China will start doing it. They may even start doing it in Africa, because I mean, at the end of the day, they were the ones pumping all of their cheap cell phones in there. So, we've had instances, and in the U.S. Air Force where we were freaking out because we had computers with like Chinese hardware in it, and they built back doors, and we're all freaking out and like, oh, is there Chinese hardware in our computers? Are they listening in on everything we're doing? Can they shut down our power grids? I don't know. Like, it's yeah. So the Chinese are working on it. I think the last thing I saw, there's about 85 countries with their own drone programs. And of course, you have to take into consideration every country that has their own artificial intelligence type program. It's all interrelated as to like where their capabilities rest and where they're going. Network-centric warfare is something that I know the Chinese, the Indians, and the Russians, everybody's working on. So it's all kind of the same concepts. They're just doing it in their own ways. Right now, the U.S. has dominance in space. So like they're still the quote-unquote big dogs. But that may change. I mean, and of course, geopolitically, like if we're threatening, I think something that's really important for New Zealand and Australia to consider is what's happening in the southern Philippines. I mean, the U.S. is talking about launching drone strikes there. They've had special operatives there, for years. And the thing about when you start dropping bombs on people is they spread. Like they don't try to stay in the same place. They try to escape the location they're in. So you're gonna have a lot of refugees spreading out to all the other islands, and the area of quote unquote hostilities grows. So I would appreciate it, if the Australian government would carefully consider that. And I mean, of course, whatever we're doing to China, we're doing to Australia's, probably New Zealand's largest trading partner. So all things to consider.
So part of the Edward Snowden revelations in 2014 that we learned about during the last election cycle in New Zealand were that there is in fact US military facilities and NSA facilities on New Zealand soil. And that was something that the public did not know. They did not know. And something which the media pretty much actively covered up even after those revelations had been made. So the situation we're facing in New Zealand is that our military top brass are so far in cahoots with the US military and Australian military and the rest of the Five Eyes that they can do things completely outside of the public awareness, but also of the political structure. So from our perspective as activists, the appearance is that our country exists in name only, but in reality, everything is being orchestrated by the United States and by the foreign militaries. So just going back to what we're discussing, how did the battlefield evolve? Like in 2004, where were they first launching drone strikes? And how did we get from 1 country to 3 countries to 7 countries?
From what I know, it started out because they thought they spotted Osama bin Laden as like this little white silhouette amongst a bunch of, black silhouettes, and he was tall, and they were just like, that's Osama bin Laden. And they're like, oh wait, we don't have bombs on this plane, so maybe if we had bombs on it, we would have got him. So that was kind of the justification was Osama bin Laden, and that's why we started putting bombs on drones. And the area of usage kind of grew from Afghanistan to Iraq, and then of course then you had in later years, Pakistan, particularly Waziristan, which is a autonomous area. The people are more Afghan than they are more or less related to the rest of the Pakistanis. So the Pakistani government has always had problems with them, and they were kind of like, yeah, okay, you can go bomb people. And then they found out, and then they started. Then people started rising up against it, and then the Pakistani government, said no, the U.S. can't do it anymore. We're kicking you out of Shamsi, and that was that. I don't know if they entirely stopped, but so there's Pakistan, and then Yemen, and then Somalia. And as far as I know, I don't know if they're doing strikes in sub-Saharan Africa or not, or if they're just using it for capture. But I think, if they were to look at the blowback it causes, they're probably going to stop using it for bombing people eventually, which I hope, and I'll be happy when they do. But as it stands, I think it's going to evolve more and more as like a surveillance weapon. And then as it automates, it's going to miniaturize, and I don't know if you watch Black Mirror. I love Black Mirror, but in the third season, there's that episode where you have the little robotic bees, and I know there are people within the defense community who are itching to develop these capabilities. Because you use it from everything from like assassinations to spying on people inside their houses. As far as I know, I don't think they have there's this movie called Eye in the Sky, and they had a little robotic beetle that flew inside there. I don't think they have those capabilities quite yet. They might, but yeah. So I don't know if I'm just rambling.
Incredibly messed up, and we often talk about enemy of the state in the movie, and the surveillance capabilities that were on display in that. And actually, the technical advisor for that, I listened to a radio show about him a couple of days ago, and he was saying that when we saw the movie, we thought of it as being futuristic, but he was saying that in fact those were things that already existed and were already in use prior to the making of that movie. So we think of movies as being the future, but in fact sometimes they are not the future, which is very, very scary in and of itself. Okay, so the next thing you talked about was private contractors and mercenaries. So recently, I know Intercept published some documents about Standing Rock and about the mercenary companies that had been involved there. So are you saying that I know that there was drone operations on the part of the good guys at Standing Rock, that we were doing our own kind of counter surveillance there amongst the protesters and whatnot. But were there drones being operated by the mercenary companies on United States soil?
Whether they were mercenaries or not, I'm not sure. I know the police force had their own drones. I think Tiger Swan were just using DJI Phantoms, like the things that you can just buy in the store. Um, it's very possible that the National Guard base up in Minot was flying um, drones over. Oh, hi! I'm in an interview. um, but it's very possible that they were doing that at a higher altitude. I didn't see them myself. Other people reported that they did. Of course, there was a lot of people reporting a lot of things, like people spraying chemicals and stuff like that. And, yeah, so I'm not 100% sure the full breadth of how drones were being used there, but I think it was really worrying because you had they were basically taking they had a counterterrorism manual, and they were taking their marching orders out of that. The police forces were. Then of course the private military contractor was Tiger Swan, and I think they were using their so they were definitely infiltrating the actual movement itself, trying to collect information, trying to create chaos. I know that whenever the big influx of veterans came in, it was used as an opportunity to send in agent provocateurs, and then of course, yeah, I mean it's a military strategy to create internal distrust within an organization and try to dissolve it. So, like those tactics were being used on Standing Rock, and at least definitely in the United States and other places around the world, the indigenous communities are extremely vulnerable. Uh, one, because it's just they have an identity that is different than the national one, and they in the U.S. they're on reservations. I know I think New Zealand. I don't want to be like wrong on this, but it sounds like their culture has been more integrated within the New Zealand culture than it has in places like Australia and the United States. But I mean, even in Australia, they're kind of like relegated to the Northern Territories, and they, are like, I think when I was there, it was some bad things going on. I'm digressing. But indigenous communities around the world, I think, are particularly vulnerable because at the end of the day, we're fighting indigenous communities in Afghanistan. The same with really any country that we're going to, and we're imposing our interests there. We're setting up governments who are friendly to our interests, and it's not so much different than colonial times. And I guess Eric Prince, was just upfront about it. He wanted to call himself a viceroy. So.
Okay, so anyone who hasn't read Jeremy Scahill's incredible book called Blackwater needs to read it. It is one of the most amazing books you will ever read in your life, and that will tell you the story about this man, Eric Prince, and how he started this mercenary empire that began subcontracting from the Pentagon and waging war around the world on battlefields around the world, and some of the horrific things that resulted from that in terms of civilian casualties, in terms of malpractice amongst those mercenaries, in terms of recruiting, really messed up recruiting practices where they would go and find soldiers who had been affiliated with regimes that had practiced torture in South America and elsewhere around the world and directly recruit them into their mercenary forces. and also more broadly about the degradation of service quality and conditions for regular soldiers and the military as a result of these big dollars being paid to these private contracting companies like Blackwater. There are some very personal stories from soldiers and families who were affected by it, and also families of civilians who were killed or who were subjected to abuses by those contractors. It's something that everybody needs to read to understand the way that the military has changed from regular government forces to these cashed up contracting forces. And often we see these sporadic headlines in the media like Pentagon loses, however many $1 billion, or can't account for however many $1 billion, or you hear about the mountains of cash that were flown into Iraq, which then nobody could come up with answers as to where all that money went. This is all innately tied in with the contracting. There is massive fraud and abuse on an epic scale, and yet these contracts are being expanded, and every year there is more of these contracting companies and more of these mercenary companies, and they're not being reined in. And in the case of Eric Prince and Blackwater, they just changed their business name, swap out a director or two and keep operating again and again with total impunity. And this is the same thing that we have seen with private spy agencies. So in New Zealand, if you've watched our past streams or read any of my past writing and articles, you will hear us frequently talking about companies like Thompson Clark Investigations Limited. These are companies that are being contracted from just the local council level, but against movements like Occupy in Auckland in New Zealand, but also at the national level and also by the military. And by contracting these companies, they are able to get around the oversight requirements for the government agencies. The private companies are not subject to the Inspector General of Intelligence Services in New Zealand. So they're able to really do the dirty work, the illegal work that maybe the government agencies can't do so easily. They usually subcontract out to these companies. And these companies are for-profit companies, so they have a vested interest in continually increasing the number of targets, because the more contracts that they have to spy on targets or to meddle in the lives of targets, the more money that they make. So yeah, read Blackwater, read Jeremy Scahill's work, because you will learn more about that than you will from the New York Times or any other mainstream publication. And it's phenomenal that despite how much we have learned, how much information has been leaked about these companies, that they continue to not only operate, but to grow and to prosper. Mm-hmm. And I think that brings me to another question. So we talk about, you talk about the saving the elephants, right? Like they say that they're launching drones to, save the wildlife and from the poachers in Africa. This kind of propaganda is something that we see time and time again. So we had a situation recently, there was a big expose on New Zealand war crimes in Afghanistan. It's turned out that soldiers that were supposedly there for reconstruction efforts were in fact engaged in combat, and not just combat against Taliban or against Al-Qaeda or whoever. They were in fact involved in revenge raids against civilian populations. They killed civilians, including women and children, unarmed civilians, burned their houses to the ground, like actual full-on war crimes. And in a recent expose about it, they interviewed the mother of one of the New Zealand soldiers who had actually been killed in Afghanistan. And they said to her, "What did the military tell you about why your son was in Afghanistan?" And she said, they told her he was there to give out books and pens to Afghani girls so that they could go to school. And of course, that was not at all what he was doing, or at all what the mission was. So in terms of drones, we hear drones are just to save soldiers' lives, because of drones, we will have less soldiers as casualties, and therefore it's a wonderful technology. And the way that drones are introduced in the Western homeland is, oh, a drone will deliver your mail, or a drone will be able to deliver a pizza to your house. It's sold to us as like something almost whimsical or like some cool new technology. But they don't tell us like a drone will in fact have a pepper spray cannon mounted on it to mass pepper spray people at a protest, which we know now is happening in the US. They don't tell us it's an automated weapon system that can launch assassination strikes on your homeland. Instead, we just hear about pizza and like dropping off your newspaper at your doorstep. So what is the end game with drones? Is it actually about getting rid of the human element of these forces altogether? Rather than just saving soldiers' lives, are they actually looking to replace soldiers in the long term?
I think in some instances, yeah. I mean, it might not be like something that's socially accepted if say the Amazon delivery drones started dropping bombs on people. I mean, it would probably not be very good for Amazon's business.
They do have a CIA contract. I'll just point that out.
Maybe. So there's a lot of really great use for drones. I know people are, and the developments of saying like administering beanbag rounds or rubber bullets could very easily be developed by figuring out how to create biodegradable bullets that you can drop seeds into the ground. And there was a really cool article about how there's a team that said that they could plant 100,000 trees in a day. And they said 5 teams around the world could I guess replant all the trees that they were losing every single year. And I think like there's about a 6 billion tree deficit from what's happening right now. So yeah, I mean, everything from firefighting to delivery to fly. I mean, they're trying to develop them for like personal transport. I mean, all this kind of stuff. It's a technology. It's really useful. I mean, no, we don't really like. It's not good for business to tell people that these things are being used to kill people, because that's scary and it really freaks out the libertarians with their guns. And I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think a guy with a stockpile of guns in his basement is really going to protect himself against a lot of a robotic army. So, I mean, we're already talking about, one of the reasons why people in the United States were supposed to keep arms and maintain militias was to protect against a tyrannical government. Well, what happens when that tyrannical government could spit out as many drones as they want, and it doesn't matter how many you kill or destroy, you just keep taking them out. I mean, I've read a fair amount of dystopia. I can figure that out. But yeah, so I mean, it's really important to figure out how to regulate these things, how to ensure that a drone can't be hacked by some malicious individual and be used against a population center or not in a developed world country. I mean, as far as the development of something that really bothers me, and I know it bothers Lisa Ling. She's also very much into looking at this stuff, is autonomy combined with stealth technology. Because the only reason you would need something like that is to bypass air defense systems. So that's creating a threat on an interstate level. So having aircraft that can get around, say Russian air defense systems or US air defense systems or Chinese air defense systems creates a whole new level of threats. And then, once those air defense systems are taken out, you have this whole like flying minefield thing comes back. In addition to ground-based drones, which will probably be supporting people on the ground. Eventually commanders are going to get really tired of losing people, so they're just going to make fully autonomous, units to patrol the streets. And I don't know how far off in the future that is, but that's just kind of the logical progression of where this goes. I know they seem to think that it's actually going to save people's lives because it'll just be robots fighting robots. In reality, why once the robots are taken out, or why go after robots when you can go after the people making robots, or the economic centers that are really creating the environment these robots can be produced. Those are targets as well. I mean, you might see a return of like the whole slash and burn tactics you did in Vietnam with the search and destroy missions, where you just wipe out whole villages because you take out one person and everybody else is going to be upset, so you might as well just take them all out. And I mean, that's one of the things that I'm actually worried about with Afghanistan, is because there's no amount of fighting that is going to solve this problem. It's not a problem that can be solved militarily. It's going to require some kind of mediated approach.
Diplomacy.
What's that?
Diplomacy. I mean, that's like the great forgotten technique.
Yep.
It feels like diplomacy is just threats now. They're great at threats and terrible at diplomacy.
And the further you develop military technology and the further that's expanded, the less diplomacy is viewed as a useful tool. And why argue with ants, like, when you could just smash them? I mean, that's
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about the testimony that you gave in Europe and in Berlin, in Germany?
So what we're doing.
Can you tell me about a bit about the other drone whistleblowers who you've been working with as well, because I believe they're involved.
So there's 2 films out right now. There's Drone, which really details like kind of the perspective of Brandon Bryant, who was a sensor operator. He was operating out of Cres and then Cannon Air Force Base down in New Mexico. So Cres was right outside of Nevada. So he was really talking about his experiences with it, and whether people like him or not, he has a perspective that is legitimate, and I think it should be listened to. The other film is called National Bird, and you have Heather, Daniel, and Lisa Ling. Heather was working in a DGS. She was a screener. She was basically telling people whether or not, like, a target was legitimate or not. And then you had Daniel, who he doesn't specify what he did in the documentary, and I don't think he would want that specified. But they were using signals in order to find targets. And then Lisa Ling, she's started out as a hacker, working with Australians, funnily enough. And she was a nurse in the military, and she transitioned into becoming, she helped, she worked on DGSs. So the DGS, to remind everybody, is kind of like the information processing centers. So she has a really unique and interesting perspective as well. And she also traveled to Afghanistan and spoke to victims of strikes that my system may have very well been involved in. So there is like National Bird is really about, we're taking this really dehumanizing weapon and we're trying to acknowledge the humanity, and not only the people that are using it who feel dehumanized sometimes, and then the people who it's used against who definitely feel dehumanized. When we were in Brussels, we spoke to the news agency. We sat in on a parliamentary discussion where Faisal bin Ali Jaber, he's an environmental engineer, and his brother-in-law, who was a imam, actually against Al Qaeda, and his nephew, who was, in the police forces, they were both attacked at his brother-in-law's wedding party, and he got asylum in Canada, and he has been trying to work with Congress and trying to work with like DC circuit judges to just get an answer. Like all they did was they gave him $100,000 in a bag, and they delivered it through the Yemeni security forces. That's what the U.S. did to compensate for the mistake that they made. And just imagine if that happened to your family. I mean, imagine if it happened to my family. Like, I would not be as, understanding as Faisal is, but, it never got published, but I actually sat down with Faisal, and you had this whole like media debacle type thing with a Laura Poitras exhibit that was happening, and they were trying to get me to go there and stand with him, watch look at airstrike photos, and I didn't turn out doing it in the end. It's not easy doing this stuff. It's not easy having to face this all the time, because it's because you're really like you're facing really bad things that you helped with, and you're acknowledging like meeting Faisal, like, I mean, he had kind of I broke down when I was talking to him, and he touched me on the back, and he like consoled me like my father would. And I mean, for all he knew, I was involved with, the strike that ended up killing his family members. And so I signed this thing. It was with myself, Lisa Ling, and Brandon Bryant. We all signed an amicus brief, basically supporting his claim that he tried to present to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And after months, they ended up throwing it out, because there's not a judge in this country with, the legal jurisdiction to determine whether or not, a strike was legitimate or not. And, really, all the guy wanted was an apology. He wanted an apology. He wanted an explanation, like any human being would. And everybody who is attacked by these things, whether it was legitimately or not legitimately, they probably have questions swirling around in their heads. I mean, they're human beings. People start fighting against the US like they never been to the US. Most of the people in Afghanistan didn't even know what 9/11 was. They didn't know how they were responsible for anything. They're not responsible. They don't know. They didn't have TVs. They hardly had radios. At the time, like there was a famine happening in 2001. I mean, there were people dying from hunger, and we bombed them. We cut off the food sources, and it's a tragedy. And these people have been at war for almost 30 years because you had the Russians, and we were fighting the Russians by proxy, supporting Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen. And we turn around a few years later and we decide he's a threat because he helped with the with 9/11, and Afghanistan was a power vacuum, and the Taliban were apparently housing Al Qaeda, because under Islamic law, when you have a guest, you protect your guest. They wanted to have them tried in an Islamic court. We didn't want to take the chances. Our country was very angry, and I look at all this and I just wonder if better choices could have been made, if all of this could have been avoided, if we had a different leader, if we had different leaders with different presences of mind, if we had some mental clarity to realize, wow, I mean, they're angry. Why are they angry? Why are they doing this? Well, we had soldiers in Saudi Arabia, and it was close to Mecca, and that might have inflamed some things. It's a lot more complicated than they just hated us.
It's a lot easier for the media to sell, and for the politicians to sell they just hated us line, than to take some responsibility for the history, the true history, as well as the present. It seems to me, Cian, I've watched some of your other videos and your other interviews, and hearing you speak here, seeing you speak here, it seems to me that you have questions, and they seem to haunt you about, I think, not knowing what you were or weren't involved in. How can you come to peace with that in the long term? I mean, I can understand it myself on a much smaller scale. As an activist who was targeted, my friends, my family, anyone I had communications with, anyone in my social circles, even right down to people associated with my children, they all were either targeted and spied on as well, or there was interference in their lives, or there was negative impacts upon them. And I've had to struggle with that, always not knowing what was happening one circle around me, having to guess all of the time at what's really going on. And I see some of that in you. It seems like you understand what you're a part of in terms of yourself, but you may never know which strikes you were or weren't involved in, or the what you worked on was. So am I right? Is that the struggle for you? Is really the not knowing?
Yeah. I mean, it's like I went there. I try to use this analogy. I don't know if it works. Maybe you can tell me. But it's kind of like somebody just set a red button on the table and said, you need to push this because it protects our guys. It protects your family. It protects all the people around you. It protects the people you work with. And you just have to push this every single day. You push it, you push it, you push it. And you're like, what is this doing? And it's like, well, it's killing bad guys. And it's like, is it only killing bad guys? It's only killing bad guys. Just keep doing what you're doing. We're killing bad guys. Don't ask questions. So keep pushing it, keep pushing it, keep pushing it. You get a piece of paper at the end that says you helped kill over 200 bad guys. And then you go look at the UN reports, and they said that there was 359 civilians that died in your area of responsibility. Like, and I mean, that's kind of what it was. I set up this piece of equipment. I saw videos of things that were happening. I saw videos of strikes that presumably went through our equipment. The data that was used in order to administer them. But you don't actually know the specific details of each and every single strike. I think if anything, my speaking out has probably woken some people up to be like, well, maybe we shouldn't, we shouldn't tell junior enlisted that they're they're doing something that's killing people. Maybe we should just keep it all in the shadows. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. I hope that there's a sort of understanding of responsibility for each and everybody's single position involved. And I hope that the people who are actually administering it feel the pressure of everybody behind them, because it's like my karma is dependent on their actions. Like what I and the other people who set this up, we're really dependent on guys who maybe they're not thinking of the humanity of the people on the ground. Maybe they just want to have some kills under their belt, so that they can put that into an awards package and get a promotion. I'm speculating. I've heard things like that, but I mean, I want to know for myself, which I probably will never know. And I also think that the victims of these strikes, I think if there's a way to communicate it to them, to their families, I think it's only going to help, and it's only going to help in the reconciliation and the coming to terms that it's a tragedy, the whole thing. Like, we don't want to be there. Like, a lot of the people that I worked with, they don't want blood on their hands. They don't want to be responsible for this stuff, because like a lot of them are asking, like, why are we there? There's no clear mission objectives. We're just there, and they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires, and the way it's going, yeah, does it morally, and it's as far as resources and as far as our own morality, it degrades the countries that go in there, because democracy can't survive a war that's a persistent war, and that's for a number of reasons I don't really want to get into, but it's a long conversation.
Right. I have a friend who is completely removed from politics and completely removed from activism, and her husband was US Air Force, and she said, we are tired. The soldiers are tired. We never signed up for this endless deployment every single year. We are tired. We've had enough. We can't take anymore. And that's the pervasive feeling amongst people, like I said, who aren't politically active, who have no political stake, but who are just in the forces. I've heard that they are tired and they've had enough.
I'm tired. When I was there, I watched 52 coffins of coalition forces go home, and in the time that I was there, the national medias of, well, at least the United States, was not allowed to record those coffins. So that was 52 people that the US was not aware of, that they're dying. They, people kind of disappear into like fantasy worlds. Like when I came back to the US, I was like, this is a land of illusions, like if we're having a bad day, we can just disappear in, Game of Thrones, or we can disappear in, some media, some like plot of a TV show, or reality TV, or just we can distract ourselves from our duty as citizens. And I don't know if there is that feeling of civic duty with the general population like there was in World War II. I think it's so easy to ignore these things are happening that most people are like, well, just that's their job, we'll just let them do it. But for the people who've been like fighting these wars, for the people who've been going over there and coming back and losing their friends, it's really traumatic. It's traumatic for the whole community.
There seems to be a huge element of survivor's guilt going on there as well. That's what I see. To me, it looks like you have a huge dose of survivor's guilt. When I first got to Berlin, when I finally got away from New Zealand and I first got to Berlin, I was trying to tell everybody what was happening in New Zealand. And it wasn't because of my situation, but because I was hyper aware that even though I had left, there was all of these targets, these people who are still being targeted every single day. And it's well and good for me to get out to somewhere safe. But I knew that what I'd had to get away from was still happening and still going on. And I have the same struggle now because I get emails every day of the week from people in New Zealand telling me, we are going through what you went through. We are being targeted by who you are being targeted by. Help us. And I'm literally racking my brains. People who follow my Facebook and Twitter will see me saying, how are we going to help these people? What can we do for these people? So I have that same sensation, it's not a mortal life or death situation in the way that it has been with the drones and is with the drones. But, well, in some cases it is, but not on such a scale. But every day I'm facing that guilt of I'm okay today. I'm all right today. I still don't know if I have a country to live in 6 months' time, but at least I'm okay. At least I can live. I'm not being stalked, harassed, surveilled, interfered with the way that I was back home. But I have this constant sensation of this urgency of how am I going to help these people? How am I going to stop the system that's doing this to them? How am I going to save them from it? And so there is that element of survivor's guilt. And that's what I see with you guys as well. And I think maybe somewhere inside you have to have like a bit of forgiveness for yourself and understanding that it is the humanity and the beauty in your heart that has actually made you make the choice to stand up and acknowledge this. Because as you say, so many people bury it. They bury it in Games of Thrones, or they bury it in the socialization of the pressure of their social circle saying, don't speak up, don't take this on. You're just one person. What can you do? You've actually set that all aside and you've stood up and you've acknowledged what's happened and you're trying to do something about it. And that's exceptional. It's truly exceptional. I had someone, very cool person, say to me that it's 1 in 10,000 people that has the guts to stand up and face the truth and to speak the truth and to try to make a change. It's 1 in 10,000. There's 9,999 people that will just drink it away, or whatever their outlet of choice is, for suppressing that little voice inside themselves that says, this is bigger than you can't do anything about it, or suppressing the voice that says you need to do something about it, you need to speak out. So maybe I'm not to play like amateur psychologist here at all with you, but maybe if you can recognize that it is the beautiful part of you that has given you the strength to stand up and to speak about this. And maybe you can't fix it. And maybe I can't fix it. Maybe I won't be able to stop the spies in New Zealand from destroying people's freaking lives every single day. Maybe you can't. Both of us and all of the whistleblowers are doing the right thing by trying. You know?
Thank you. Most I hope for is more people to stand up and try to, tell their stories and explain, and try to figure it out themselves and not just to bury it. Because like it's really easy doing something as abstract as working on, technical systems to just be like, oh, okay, I got the number. It wasn't me. It was somebody else. I'm just gonna move on with life and do that thing. But I mean, I suspect there's always that nagging in the back of their head. Eventually it might catch up with them. Maybe it won't. But I think it's really important for a healthy society to be able to humanize, what's happening, and not rely so heavily on, say, like Hollywood to transmit the values that are learned from war. Because if you do, then it's really just going to turn out, like American Sniper or something. Which it's really funny because like I was in a theater during a military ski weekend watching that movie. You had a lot of people. They probably fresh back from war. They're standing up, hooting and hollering, it's like, yeah, kill them, and like it's the thing is like, yeah, on the one hand, it might be really useful for recruitment. On the other hand, the rest of the world is watching this and they're thinking the United States is a bunch of sociopaths. Like, and I would like to see more stories and more people coming out and just talking about their experiences, like for as little as they might be, to like, we got to support the people who had really, really hard experiences and be able to support them and not demonize them. But also bring in the voices of the victims and the people who are, victims of these wars into the picture. And what I hope for is a day when we can all sit around a table and we can have a conversation that leads to peace.
Absolutely. We talked last week with John Kiriakou, and I was saying that John coming forward and saying what he did about torture absolutely will have forced other people in the CIA and the contractors at some point, even for a moment, to reflect on what they actually are doing. Not what they've been told is why they're doing it, but to actually to confront that what they are doing is torture. Him calling it torture and forcing even up to the president having to admit that it was torture will have made all of the people involved in that program at some point have to reflect upon the reality of it and not just tell themselves the lies and reinforce the lies. And it's the same thing with Snowden, with Ed. That him doing what he did would have made nearly every single person in the NSA have to confront the reality of what they were involved in, and would change the way that they saw themselves and what they're doing when they're targeting people, when they're looking in their little crystal ball at people every day. And I think that what you guys have done absolutely will also have forced people in the drone program it will have impacted the way that they see the program itself and their personal involvement in it. And I feel, looking in from the outside, to me, it seems that there has been somewhat of a landslide effect with the drone whistleblowers. Like, there does seem to be more and more of them coming forward. And even those who remain on the inside, almost, very importantly, but who leak the information and who leak the documents from the inside, so that people do know what's going on, because there's been several instances of that now. That's really, really important. So in that sense, you guys have had a massive impact. Whether or not we get to pass laws, or whether or not we are successful at the UN or European Court of Human Rights or wherever, that awareness, you have penetrated people's awareness of what they are personally involved in, and that's priceless. To be able to do that, it's huge.
We can hope, because speaking from personal experience, whenever Bradley Manning at the time leaked those things, what year was that? Was that 2010? Yeah. So we were told, if you go to the WikiLeaks site, we'll know about it. And don't go to the WikiLeaks sites. Don't look at news articles about it. Don't look at any of this stuff. And there's the whole element of that. Like the people, the people on the inside of the NSA may very well not know anything other than what their people told them to think about Edward Snowden. So, there's ways around these things, but eventually they're going to get out, and eventually they're going to have to talk to people outside the community, and hopefully by then maybe they will have the presence of mind to actually consider that he revealed something that was unprecedented in human history, and these things should be talked about more generally than just from a few people sitting behind a computer somewhere in a shadowy agency,
At the risk of speaking for him, which I wouldn't want to do, I would guess that there was a little voice inside of him that grew a little bit bigger and a little bit more insistent over a long period of time, until he could not take it anymore. And I think that what you guys have done is create the beginnings of that little voice in other people who are involved in the drone program. And I think it will be the same evolution for them. And it might take them 1 month or 3 months or 3 years, or some people 30 years to actually come out and say, this is what I was involved in, this is what we were doing, it's completely wrong, I can't live with it. The quintessential deathbed confessions, right? Like that come out all the time. But you can be that little spark that began at the beginning of that journey for them. So you never know. A musician friend told me this, and I've seen some examples of it in my own life. I've had people, again, who are not at all interested in politics, who have nothing to do with activism, who I've known in my personal life for a very long time, and they're completely silent, like through thousands of my posts, hundreds of articles I've written, they say absolutely nothing. And then one day I get this huge letter from them. There's been several occurrences of this, where they say, you have no idea how much your work has changed me, and I can't believe, you've taught me so much, and it's woken me up, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, wow, like I had no idea. They'd never comment on my stuff. I would have no idea they were even reading what I'd written, let alone that it had any impact for them, until the day that they finally crack and tell me. And I had a really good friend who's a musician say the same thing. He's like, you put out this music and you don't really know, is anyone actually, what impact is it having on them, until one day they come and tell you, when such and such died in my life, like this song got me through it. I was suicidal, and yet this music has like gave me what I needed. And this is the thing, we never really know the full extent of our impact. Sometimes we get some hints of it later on. But understand that what you're doing is so important. It is so important, and you'll be influencing people all around the world that you don't even realize, just by having the courage to be the canary in the coal mine. having the courage to stand up and openly speak about things that we are socialized into believing is improper for us to speak about. So well done. Okay, I could sit here and praise you quite happily for hours.
Yeah, it's really
but we'll move on. We'll move on because I know that there are people who will have questions for you. So we have a very hardworking team of people on social media who are on our YouTube and our Facebook and Twitter. So I'm going to invite Blake on now. He's one of the very cool members of our media team. Hi, Blake.
Hey.
Other people will remember from past events. Blake, do you have some questions for Sean?
Yeah, someone called Someone on YouTube asked, how much involvement did the corporations have in Intel, and what happens to the person who gets the unlucky SIM card?
So explain, okay. Corporations have, okay, so you asked like two questions. Can you repeat kind of and elaborate?
Yeah, sort of the same guy, two questions. How much involvement did corporations have in Intel?
Well, the thing is, I believe it was Paul Wolfowitz in 2003 kind of deregulated the NSA. So, I mean, there was this document. It was Top Secret America by the Washington Post, and they said that it at least diffused into about 2,000 companies, and so yeah, so I mean, like you go to Crystal City, I believe is, or Fort Meade, and you basically just have this huge community of top secrets, people who have top secret clearances, security clearances, and and compartmentalized into different companies. Edward Snowden was in Booz Allen Hamilton. Who would ever thought, he was working on some of the things that he was working on. And by having these like different companies that are controlling different parts of the infrastructure, they kind of build it up into this thing. It's like deep layer security. And the idea is if you have an attacker, then they would try to catch you, within this web of all these, convoluted security measures. And then the other part was like, what happens to somebody who is unlucky with a SIM card? Well, it really depends. A signature strike does not require a positive ID, despite what they say. It's happened in the heat of the moment. They've thought they had the person, they did not have the person. A perfect example is the strike that happened in Cres. It's in the movie National Bird. There was not a single person in that convoy, and I don't know how much SIM card had to do with this, but they believe they had a positive ID on a group of high value targets moving to, from one location to another within an area that they thought was hostile, because I think there was operations that might have happened somewhere around there, and they bombed them twice, and they were spotting for I think it was two Kiowa helicopters. So 23 of them died, including, I believe, 4 children. And they are devastated. The guy, I mean, from the children to the grandmothers, like every time they hear a helicopter flying over, they duck, they cover, they're like freaking out, like, and lost limbs. It's just bad. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into as far as that goes, or like what the question was oriented towards, but yeah.
Sweet. Zachariah Wilburn sort of put 2 questions into one as well, but do you think, and this, I think this is to everyone, but do you think legislation protecting airspace above cities, states, or property would help diminish the proliferation of drone use? And what can be done to hold the private mercenaries more accountable?
Well, I could tell you what a libertarian would say, because in their perspective, the state is evil. And, if you got rid of the state funding all of these private mercenaries, then you would have, I'll tell you different perspectives. If you had private mercenaries basically acting as like neighborhood watch or whatever, it wouldn't be in their best interest to commit atrocities because people wouldn't want to hire them because it just makes people mad. I don't know if that's how the world will ever work, but one of my big worries is that we're moving towards this sort of neo-feudalism where you have very rich people who are able to cross national boundaries, buy citizenships and do whatever they want, and then they can hire their own private militaries to do their bidding and go extract resources where they need to. I mean, I'm probably explaining this in a really general way, but I'm just like, yeah. I don't know. There was a two-part. What was the second half? I don't know.
What can be done to hold the private mercenaries more accountable?
Right. And I think the first part of that question was like regulation over airspaces. Like right now in the U.S., the FAA is pretty much the only thing like stopping military, like weaponized drones from flying over. Like that's the organization that's like standing in between everything. So having regulation, like you can do geofencing, you can box off areas like to stave off attacks at airports. They'll just like create a geofence around it so no commercially available drone can fly into it. That does not include people who build their own. But yeah, it's going to require a lot of work. They're developing these like RF jamming guns, to point in the direction, and apparently it'll just like cause their navigation systems to go out and they have to land or crash or whatever. There's people who are developing cannons to shoot nets to catch commercial drones. There's the French police and the Dutch police are using trained golden eagles to take them out. Although when I was at DEF CON, they were like, here's the way to get around that. You just attach a flamethrower to a drone and you just roast them. So yeah, I mean, it's just an evolving like field, I guess.
And talking about that, what about the other way? East Slider asked, do we know if any drones are being used to breach networks, like maybe if they were near a Wi-Fi or something, or a cell tower?
So one thing I saw at DEF CON was really interesting. Also incredibly simple. It's just a drone that is running Kali Linux on it, and they fly it around, a wireless keyboard or a wireless mouse, and they are able to hijack that. And that was their demonstration. And I mean, I think they call it the hacker drone. Something to look into. Please don't use it. Yeah. But as far as like, yeah, I think that's totally feasible.
Tedium Nation asked, apart from spreading the word and donating, is there anything else we can do feeling useless outside New Zealand? And he said, thank you for your courage in doing this. That we truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is so sweet and so cool. Sean, from your perspective, what can people do to help the drone whistleblowers?
To help the drone whistleblowers, well, I can tell you there's a Australian PhD researcher. Her name is Alex Edney Brown. She's from University of Melbourne, and she went to Afghanistan and she interviewed drone victims for her PhD thesis. Somebody like me might have a problem doing the same exact thing. There's people who are out there who have more capacity to do things like that. But I mean, we really need to get the voices of the people who are wrongfully targeted out. And then we also, just having debates, not ignoring it. I mean, that's why we're here, is so that people talk. It's not to aggrandize ourselves. It's not necessarily like the happiest moments in our life that we're talking about. So that's how I see it. And just, yeah, I mean, I think that's all I would say.
So, from the perspective of the Internet Party, there is a number of things that you can do to support us. So yes, donating is a huge help because we are up against billionaires and we are up against agencies that have almost free reign of the public purse. So if you can donate, anyone in the world can donate up to 1,500 New Zealand dollars, but no more, please. So long as you're not a corporation or a government, you have to be a private individual from anywhere on earth, at internet.org.nz/donate. So that does make a big difference for us because we have learned the hard way that the only way to get a voice in media is to buy one, which is tragic and is not at all how things should be, but is how things are in this day and age in election campaigns. If you can't donate, you can volunteer. So we have an amazing crew of people from all around the world who are participating in our campaign. And whether that's doing event support, social media support, copywriting, any number of different things that you can do to help support our campaign, we can accept volunteers from anywhere, no matter what your skill set is. We have people editing videos, doing graphics, all kinds of amazing stuff for us. And we are fully reliant upon the skills and the goodwill. Like Blake here is a classic example of someone who volunteered for our campaign and now finds himself on live stream every week with whistleblowers, asking questions and talking to the public and just generally being an amazing help to us.
I wasn't expecting to be doing that, but yeah.
Oh, I also have one more plug that I need to do. Watch the film National Bird. It's by the director Sonia Kennebec. It's really, it gives you some perspective.
Awesome. And if our social media guys, if you could do me a favor, can you guys find the link to National Bird? I assume, is it freely available on the web?
I think it's on Netflix. Probably on Amazon, iTunes. I don't know. I'm really, I don't know all the specifics of that, but I mean, maybe your media person can find that.
Even if you guys can find a Wikipedia page for it or something, or some promo page or website, I'm sure it exists. Circulate some information about that, please, so that people know where to look for it. That would be awesome. So yeah, pretty much donating for to our campaign or volunteering for our campaign is awesome. The other thing that is really great is to go on our website and click on the news page on internet.org.nz and to go and read the articles that have been written by us and support the media orgs that have been giving us coverage. And you can also feel free to troll the hell out of the New Zealand media who have been absolutely pitiful and terrible and epically failing to cover our campaign. Last Sunday night, we were #1 trending in New Zealand. We had 6 million Twitter impressions on our event, and the New Zealand media still didn't cover us. So there's this really malicious cycle going on at the moment in New Zealand media where they don't tell the public that our campaign exists. They won't give them any information about it whatsoever. And then they will poll the public who've heard nothing about us and nothing about our campaign, and get this terrible poll result about us, and then publicize the terrible poll result and tell people that the terrible poll result is why they're not giving us airtime. So it's like this malicious circle that they set up. It's like, it's despicable, but it's precisely what's been going on. So
Well, I was polled just like literally less than an hour ago. So I said the internet party.
and they probably like strike that one off. He was saying.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put anything past them. Seeing, you know, I often say to reporters, like, I wouldn't, had the media done their job, I would actually never have written a single article. I didn't set out to be a journalist. I didn't have any aspiration to become a journalist. I became one purely because I was seeing things happen that were not being reported on, or that were being skewed and misreported on. And so it's funny that the new media has been created by the failings of the old media. And I think the New Zealand public who come across our information because we're trending on Twitter or for whatever reason, and discover how much we've been involved in, how much we've actually been doing this entire time that our campaign hasn't been acknowledged by the media, will begin to get their own wake-up call actually about the state of things and how they really are in New Zealand. But it's a terrible indictment on the media that they have not included us in any of the debates, even though we got nearly 40,000 votes last election. And yet they invite parties that didn't even exist last election to participate in the debate. So it's a total sham as far as I'm concerned. But we'll continue building our audience and doing what we do, because the issues for us are actually more important. I just sent a tweet a few minutes ago which said, what we're doing here on the stream right now is timeless. It's not about one election. This is so much bigger than one election. Drones and drone victims and surveillance, these are things that we're going to have to face no matter what happens in the election. And this is something that I'm really proud to be a part of, you know, regardless of whether we ever get a vote, regardless of whether we ever participate in a televised debate. Doesn't matter, because the debate that we're having here is actually more important than anything that you'll ever see on the mainstream TV news. So, okay, is there anything else, Blake, or is that it? Should we let Sean go?
There was so another one about like what legislation do you imagine helping these issues?
Great question. It's a really good question, is how do we address this from a policy perspective going forward?
Well, I know that the British Parliament now has an APPG on drones. It would be nice to see other countries that are involved with this global infrastructure to also develop groups, maybe have different ones of these groups meet together, like say the Australians and the British. They could meet together with maybe the Germans, and I mean we're operating out of your countries, so I think there should be, you know, there should be a voice from those countries as well. So maybe a union, like a global union, and you know, I'm sure you can come up with some good policy from that. You know, and that's something to sort of counterbalance the United States on these issues, perhaps. I'd like to see something like that, because ultimately, you know, we need to have some form of global governance before we even start thinking about having these, you know, autonomous robots with the capacity to kill. Like, I mean, this is the predecessor. This is, this is like the drone program now is what it's the evolution of things in the past, and it will continue to evolve into what we see in the future. And I think right now we're at a critical moment, and it's important that the different governments cooperate together to draft something that is in the interest of their people. And overall, I think once you start seeing movement in that direction, then maybe we can start seeing things on the UN level. And that's what I hope for.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Blake. I really appreciate that. Okay, Cian, thank you so much for being here. Like, it's been amazing to have you and amazing to have this discussion, because these issues are not going away. They're simply not. And to the pervasive trolls who keep trying to tell me on Twitter that no one cares, our last event got 6 million Twitter impressions, which was almost double the first one. People do care. They really do care. Funnily enough, they actually don't want to live in a world of flying killer robots. And funnily enough, they don't want to live in a world with an ever-expanding battlefield that goes from 1 country to 3 countries to 7 countries to 100 countries. And I think that everybody understands innately that this is going to come home to us. We are going to have to face it. You might be able to bury your head in the sand about internet parties, election campaign. You will not be able to bury your head in the sand about perpetual ongoing war and all of the costs of that, both human and environmental and economic costs of that. That impacts all of us every day, and every year impacts us more than the year before. And this is now intergenerational warfare. People are frequently pointing out that the soldiers that are being sent to fight now are the sons and daughters of the soldiers who were sent to fight in these same countries 15 years ago. And if we don't face these issues, if we do keep burying our heads in the sand, we're still going to have these issues in another 10, 15 years' time. We're going to have the granddaughters and grandsons of the original soldiers being sent to Afghanistan. And that's just completely ridiculous. So the media might not be brave enough to confront it. The politicians might not be brave enough to confront it. But everyday ordinary people who do pay the cost for it are going to have to confront it sooner or later. And the sooner that we do it, the better. So that's really it from me on that topic for now. There will be plenty more discussion about it in the coming weeks. So again, huge thank you, Cian. It means a lot to us that you came and that you gave your personal testimony. I know it is deeply personal to you, these issues. I know you can't escape them. Many people have the luxury of that choice, and you don't. And I respect not just the bravery, but the emotional courage that it takes to talk about this stuff. So please know that you are deeply respected for it.
Thank you for having me. And I will say that it's a lot more interesting talking to the internet party than it is the Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, I think the Democrats and Republicans like us about as much as they like drone whistleblowers. So we're equally important. So thank you so much for being here. Feel free to stick around if you want to.
Sure.
So coming up next, we have got some really awesome people from the Pirate Party who are going to have a quick chat with us, and then we're going to get on with actually drafting this anti-spy bill that we've been working on. So we've been really blessed this year to have international activists from pirate parties all around the world working with the Internet Party campaign, and particularly working with us on beginning the framework together for the anti-spy bill, and giving us amazing support as well with social media and other things. So I've asked Ray from Pirate Party Norway and Pirate Parties International, and also Bailey Lamont, who I hope is still with us, who is from Pirate Party Canada, to jump on and have a little talk with us. I'm really interested to know from their perspective what the significance is of the Untitled Party campaign and why they've chosen to really jump in boots and all with us, and maybe tell us a bit about what's happening with them. And then we're going to launch these etherpads, and you guys are going to get to see the workspace that we are going to, as a globe, collaborate together to draft this bill. So hi, Ray, and hi, Bailey.
Hello.
Welcome to the stream.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, everybody. Let's let Bailey introduce herself first.
Okay, so my name's Bailey Lamont, and yeah, I'm the president of the Pirate Party of Canada and also the vice chair of Pirate Parties International. Yeah, really cool to be here.
So cool to have you.
Yeah. And I'm Raymond Johansson. They call me Ray. I'm in the Pirate Party of Norway. As you can see here, Teddy is too, by the way. He's in the Pirate Party. I'm also a member of the board of Pirate Parties International. I'm not a politician. Maybe not so good at drafting bills, but maybe I'm good at spotting talent, and that's what we did when we saw somebody put our Susie in the driver's seat of the internet party, and especially when we saw the anti-spy bill. I love New Zealand, never been there. I think it's a little bit like Norway. It's probably the only place where you can experience fjords and stuff. Anyway, the anti-spy bill is probably a more global thing than only a New Zealand thing. So I thought we'd take the resources and our what you might call it, the people that we know across the world, and support the efforts that are going on Sundays now. Also, we've invited the Internet Party to join as a full member, the Internet Party of New Zealand to join as a full member the Pirate Parties International later this year. We also intend to try to draft cooperation contract with them for the coming weeks. So that's it, really. Bailey, from your side, the anti-spy bill, Canada, which is one of the countries that has imported C-51, imported the Patriot Act, C-51.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I think that this these conversations that have been happening over the last couple of weeks are just amazing. Not only, I mean, the guests are obviously amazing, and you know, I know that, you know, I learned so much just by listening, and but at the same time, there's this motivation to make this anti-spy bill, right? That is going to address a lot of key issues that we're dealing with around the world. You know, surveillance, data collection, spy cops, all of these things. Like I could go on and on about that, but these things are relevant everywhere, right? It's I think that there's of course going to be different contexts, different political contexts that you know, this will have to kind of fit into. Like it might look a little different in Canada than in New Zealand, for example, and whatnot. But just the idea of getting the public involved in creating an anti-spying bill is just in and of itself a really amazing thing. And it's so different from how more traditional politicians and political parties do things. I mean, they just kind of do everything behind closed doors, and even a lot of your average party members don't even have a whole lot of say in how these things get put together, right? It's just kind of the people at the top, and everybody else just goes along with it. But this is a real participatory process, and that I think just speaks for itself. And it's really amazing to see this happening in New Zealand. I hope that we can take this idea and apply the same thing to Canada as well. The Pirate Party. I mean, you know, the Pirate Party and the Internet Party, they're different, but we stand for a lot of the same things, right? So it's really good if we can bounce ideas off each other and collaborate wherever we can. So it'll be really, really amazing to see where this goes and how it develops through time.
Yeah, it's like this. We live in a time where just a few months ago, the major parties in Norway start supporting something they call the digital defense, the border defense. What that is simply the intelligence industry sucking up all the internet traffic going in and out of Norway. And they try to make it about Putin and terrorism. The funny thing is that there is no terrorism in Norway, and Putin, well, I guess he's everywhere, at least on everybody's mind. But I don't see how or why we would need to read my love letters to Canada or Africa, for that matter, to protect us from a non-existing terrorism. And then, you know, some smart guys down in New Zealand and in Moscow comes up with the anti-spy bill, and I see the possibility of us actually, exporting the anti-spy bill from New Zealand 50 times as fast around the globe as the Patriot Act has been exported. You know, the Patriot Act went to Canada first with C-51, then to France, and then Snooper Charter in the UK. The Germans have a series of bills. The other day I saw that Putin actually had almost copied one and is trying to present it to the Duma in Moscow. So why don't we take the concept and the boldness of the Internet Party and the anti-spy bill and put it all over the globe as fast as we can. To put it simply, let's start with making mass surveillance illegal everywhere. Bulk surveillance, mass surveillance, whatever you call it. There is no reasoning for it. Let me end this point by saying some smart guys looked at what had come of all the NSA spying in the US. And I think they found one guy that had sent $550 to maybe Afghanistan or something. He was convicted based on mass surveillance. Other than that, they couldn't find any single case where mass surveillance had helped. So thank you, New Zealand, and I hope we can steal something from you.
Really appreciate those thoughts from you, and it's been fantastic to have the support of the Pirate Parties International as we've built this, and certainly some of the collaborative tools that we've leveraged, and obviously the Pirate Party have been doing this kind of thing for a little bit longer, and I suppose in the global movement, we've only just, I suppose in the last month or so, started taking Internet Party to the world, and it's fantastic to see how these kind of ideas that are built and bred around the internet can spread so far. So I think we're just going to, we're just biding time for Suzie, but certainly our next sort of effort is to collaborate on this bill. Do you want to introduce the Etherpad to the world? Sorry, I got a sleeping baby on my.
Oh, that's totally fine. Yeah, totally fine.
Susie's back as well. Yeah,
I'm back.
I can give you an introduction on the. I can give you an introduction on the Etherpads or the history behind that. It goes like this: a pirate pad or an Etherpad is a tool that pirates have been using for a very long time. Every meeting or every attempt at collaborating, we open up a pad, and there anybody with access to the URL can write at the same time as other people, and your writing shows up with different colors, and it may seem like anarchy and chaos, but it actually does work. We were lucky enough in the upswing to the first of these meetings to have the Pirate Party of Norway share our technology with Incident Party New Zealand, and we'll see if we can make that work. If people are more awake than me, I have 6:30 right now. I don't know, Suzie. Do you want to see if we can get going?
Okay, so step one is our social media team, please distribute the link to the Pirate Pad, and let's have people get a look at what it actually is. And I also will grab the link and I will screen share and we'll have a little look. So from memory, what's in it so far is we've put some notes, links to and notes about the existing pieces of legislation in New Zealand, which we consider to be extremely problematic, and what some of the issues with them are. So just to fill Sean in, because I'm not sure if he has been across our discussions in the previous meetings, but some of the despicable stuff that's going on in New Zealand right now, actually, I've just got the link, so I will read directly from the pad. In fact, I'll go a step further and screen share it for you guys now. Okay, let me try and up the size on this a bit. Right, so two purposes for this pad. There's actually three, we'll get to that soon. So the first is to review the offensive segments of the existing pieces of New Zealand legislation and to educate you guys about the issues. And then the second is to draft the anti-spy bill itself. And this effort, the actual drafting, will happen across the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we're not expecting to have a finished product today, but this is just going to be our first little, in New Zealand would say our first tutu, means like our first little play at letting people actually write in the pad and contribute their ideas will happen in the coming like 40 minutes. The bill pertains to and reflects the current situation in New Zealand, and concerned citizens of other countries can then use this as a template to draft their own anti-spy bills going forward. So how cool. You will see on this pad that there is a little chat section here, and you can actually see our discussions, I think. Going back over, so you will see, I'm not sure if our colors persist. Do they, Ray? Am I still green? Will I still be green?
Yeah, you're green, Suzie. If you click on the little banner on the up the top on the right where it's got the 10 people, you can name yourself and you can choose a color. Yep.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so you guys can actually enter your name here and you can pick the color that you want. Hopefully there's enough shades for us all. And then you can begin to write on the pad. So I'll take the next few minutes just to go through the information that is already in here. So the existing legislation that we're really concerned about in New Zealand. First of all, there's something called the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Bill. Hi, Jeremy. So in that legislation, okay, what have we got here? This bill brought banks and policing together. That's a really good way to describe it. And its provisions have been used not just against money launderers or terrorists, funnily enough, but against activists and journalists and political threats to the status quo. And that's the overarching theme of all of this problematic legislation, is it gets sold as being about terrorism, but funnily enough, it's not about that at all. The software run by the banks is made by Palantir. Palantir, you will have heard a lot about if you've studied Barrett Brown's work or the work of Project PM. Palantir are very much into automation and into AI. They work with intelligence agencies, They work with banks and large corporations. They work with private intelligence agencies as well as government intelligence agencies. And what they do is they take these big data sets, commercial and government, and integrate them to gather as much information together as they can. And then they apply filters to that information and allow querying on it, so that they can search on anything from government databases or policing and security databases to credit card databases or health databases or education databases or anything. They can just build these incredibly complex and revealing profiles of people, normal citizens from countries all around the world, and then make that information available to their customers for profit. So the banks are considered critical infrastructure of the state. So this is where the corporations have integrated with the security agencies under this guise of the major corporations being critical infrastructure for a country. It has pulled those commercial institutions inside of the government security umbrella. You see too, when we look into the definition of terrorists in New Zealand, has become a threat to national security is a terrorist, but then a threat to national security becomes a threat to the critical infrastructure, which is now the banks or the major corporations, even oil companies, mining companies. And it's under this premise that they're expanding to include activists and journalists as terrorists, because activists and journalists investigating or taking action against these private corporations that are under the critical infrastructure umbrella are being considered then a threat to national security, even though they're actually not a threat to national security at all. They're actually acting in the public's best interest and acting for social progress and democratic change. They are being exposed through legislation like this to these draconian measures, purely because of the corporations being integrated as critical infrastructure and therefore covered by these national security type acts. So here we can tell by the very name of the legislation, anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. Well, who wouldn't be against that? We don't want money launderers and we don't want terrorists to have money to buy weapons and kill people. But unfortunately, the provisions of the bill and the wording and the definitions means that it is expanded to cover normal everyday people who are just taking action about a certain issue. So then we've got a link to the Human Rights Commission review of the legislation and the issues with it. If someone on social wants to do me a favor, Tech Liberty is a really great organization in New Zealand that has done a lot of study about these bills as well. And the New Zealand Law Society. The funny thing is that the pre-existing laws are actually all on the side of democratic activism, which is why often you see activists who get arrested or targeted by the state. When they go through the court system, the charges are dropped, and often even the activists win big settlements. And the reason is because it's actually not legal for them to be targeted. We have the Bill of Rights, we have the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. These things are meant to protect this type of activism, but then these anti-terrorism bills that are introduced are then violating those rights. So when groups like the New Zealand Law Society or the Human Rights Commission go ahead and, oh cool, that's so awesome what you guys are doing. When they go ahead and review these bills, often they find that the bills completely contradict human rights and completely contradict international law. And then they release the review. So this is cool. The links are already going in here, which is great.
Point of order.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, when pirates or others use this, we tend to often repeat which line we are at. That's the reference point, so that everybody listening to, maybe not looking at you, but maybe editing in the pad, will know where you are and what you're talking about. So that's very useful.
That is really useful, and I really like that, like how you guys have put the general like category search link for tech liberty, so that then the next person can click on that and go through and find the actual review of this piece of legislation. It's like really helpful to stage the research like that. It's really good. So thank you, and that's wonderful to see links already going in there. Thank you so much. So then the next piece of legislation that we think is particularly abhorrent is called the Telecommunications Intercept Capability and Security Bill, known as TICS, actually, not TICSA in New Zealand. So this is the bill that literally deputised the workers of ISPs in New Zealand, internet service providers. I've got security on the brain now. Internet service providers in New Zealand to actively participate in spying on New Zealand citizens. So here we go. This bill deputised employees of ISPs to become proxy state spies on behalf of the GCSB. The GCSB is like the New Zealand NSA. It forces all ISPs to become intercept capable or intercept ready, providing direct access to their networks, to their actually at an architecture level, at a systems architecture and network architecture level. They now all have a tunnel directly to the spy agencies inside of their systems. This means that literally with or without a warrant, actually, depending on the other provisions of the other bills, that their core information can be just sucked out by the spy agency at any time. It is widely loathed, this bill, by the industry that it indentured, because they have just pushed all of the responsibility onto the ISPs to comply with this bucket list of all the things that they wanted to have done, rather than the government having the onus on them to complete these tasks. I love you too, someone. Thank you. They've put the onus on these companies to do it. And when you raise the compliance bar that high, what it does is actually restrict the ability of everyday ordinary people to start their own ISP. So in New Zealand, especially in the 90s, we had a lot of like garage type ISPs where, you know, some guys with a router started their own ISP, and it was really like net freedom, hacktivist culture kind of startups. Some of them became very successful over time. Their compliance is now so onerous, and that simply can't happen. So what it does is create an environment where only the big corporations can get their foot in the door to even start an ISP. So then we have the third rotten piece of legislation, a very famous one, which is called the GCSB bill. The GCSB bill turned into the Aussie Data Retention Act, turned into the UK IP bill, turned into the USA Freedom Act, and the Canadian legislation that Bailey was just talking about before as well. So this bill spread around the world like this virus, basically. And what it did was to retroactively, which no law should be able to do, retroactively legalize mass surveillance and legalize international spy agencies, which were only ever supposed to be able to spy externally on other countries, to allow them to spy on their own citizens. So what they're basically trying to do is to legalize the kind of abuses that had been exposed by Edward Snowden and others. So it also, because it was retroactively applied, it effectively immunized spy agencies for historic and current breaches of the laws that had governed them from inception, from the charters, the founding charters of these spy organizations. They were not supposed to prey on their own citizens. And that's precisely what they've been doing. So this is the bill that sparked a mass movement in New Zealand against its passage. So we had over 20 towns and cities in New Zealand protesting vociferously against this bill. We had massive dissent. We fought so hard and for so long that even the mainstream media had to cover this issue. 5 nights a week it was on the news because New Zealanders were so disgusted by it. and it passed by 1 vote eventually. So another thing you see with this legislation is that it gets passed under urgency. So they say it's like because it's a matter of national security and for terrorism, that they have to like table it under urgency and push it through, you know, instead of going through the full consultation full consultative process. I'm getting tongue tied now. Instead of going, you know, having the full public inquiries and hearings and everything like that, they just shove it through as fast as they can. Then we get, really these bills just get worse and worse and worse. We've listed them in chronological order, and each one is just more horrific than the last one. So then the next one was the Countering Terrorist Fighters Act. Okay, this we call the Orwell Bill. So there's some like semi-famous memes of me going around at the moment talking about how Orwell has already happened in New Zealand. It's not something that's coming in the future. It's not something that might happen or that we risk, you know, that we risk facing. It's something that already exists now. And Orwell is cameras inside your house recording you in your domestic space, supposedly lawfully. And this is the bill that did it. So this bill legalized warrantless spying on New Zealanders inside their homes. And remember, this bill has already been passed. It's already happened. The bill refers to this as domestic visual surveillance. The first draft was for 72 hours of warrantless Orwell-style spying. This was then revised to 48. And then at the time of its passage was 24. So the targets are not only terrorists defined as a threat to national security, but anyone who can consider to be aiding or abetting a threat to national security. So anyone who's providing any kind of material support, or I mean, even technically could be like have enhanced the ability of the government to actually revoke the citizenship of people who they deem to be a threat to national security. And funnily enough, this was actually this is part of the reason why I ended up applying for asylum, because we found out in August of last year, in 2016, through the Intercept and TVNZ and Nikki Haga's coverage, that one of the 88 targets of the GCSB, the New Zealand citizens who had been targeted and had been targeted by the NSA directly, had in fact had their passport revoked. And when they do that, you're effectively left stateless. And so for me, especially traveling with children, once we discovered that that had happened and had already been used against one of the targets, the legal advice to me was that if I traveled and they revoked my passport, that I risked being left stateless in transit. And that on that basis, it was too dangerous for me to travel and that I needed to stay put. So this has had a very personal consequence for me, and would for other New Zealanders as well who are engaged in the types of activism and journalism that I'm engaged in, and particularly any of those who are already known to have been targeted by the spy agencies. So, and then we have this year's new one. Now, this is the only act that I have not got to extensively study yet. The other 5 are acts that I have written articles about and studied extensively. But what we know about this is that this latest act, the 6th act, is to enhance the ability of the spy agencies to commit crimes, to engage in activities that would otherwise be completely unlawful in order to support their activities of spying on people. So, having educated you guys on those bills and given you the links directly to the legislation, one of the things that we saw in the legislation is that, for example, the GCSB bill, where the government has wanted to revoke previous pieces of legislation, remarkably, they simply take the part that they want to revoke and literally put a line through it. So what we're thinking is that this anti-spy bill has 2 functions. One is that we want to strike through the offending sections of the existing legislation to eradicate them. or to nullify them. And then the second part is that we want to draft new provisions, which are all of them are protections against known abuses that have been perpetrated by these agencies. So in the coming 2 weeks, what we will do is we will have the specific provisions that we feel are dangerous, the exact text as they appear in the existing bills, and we will strike through them. And that will be the first part of the anti-spy bill, will be to revoke those really dangerous provisions that are in current law. And then the second part is to turn the principles that we have all agreed upon will be part of our anti-spy bill over the last 2 weeks, to draft them into the new bill. So that's the two parts. One is to get rid of the rotten legislation that already exists, and part two is to create new legislation, new protections based on these principles. So, drafting the anti-spy bill. Enough of spy bills, because as you can see, there's a whole list of them. Enough of spy bills. It's past time for the pendulum to swing back the other way. This is a proposal for legislation to limit and regulate surveillance. So, until now, the spy agencies have held a carte blanche to commit a variety of crimes against citizens without penalty. It is time to restrict them from participating in certain acts and to apply criminal penalties to violations. That is really important, because as soon as you actually say, not only can you not do this, but you're going to jail if you do it, that's when they're going to wake up. That's when they're going to think twice about what they're doing. There has to be criminal penalties. And the other thing is that we must apply this legislation to both the private and the public sector. This cannot just apply to the spy agencies themselves. It must apply to the contractors and the subcontractors, or it's meaningless. We can't just rely on oversight anymore. So, because there simply isn't any effective oversight. So quickly, I'll just go over these briefly, because if you guys have seen our previous two sessions, you will already know what these are. So number one, we are wanting to prohibit what is known as spy cops, which are not just cops, they're not just government agencies, they are these private investigation agencies as well, and their employees and subcontractors. We want to prevent them from engaging in sexual relationships with their targets. Now, a normal person would think that's totally straightforward. Of course they can't have sex with people that they're targeting. Unfortunately, that's exactly what they have been doing. They target people sexually. They engage in sexual relationships with them. There are cases where they have lived with people and even people's children for years. There's cases where they have had children, where they've fathered children with activists and using false identities, and then disappeared, never to be seen again. It is a disgusting, immoral practice that there must be a serious penalty for. So, second of all, targeting on political grounds is prohibited under international law already. However, some of these agencies have Wikipedia pages where they openly admit that the purpose of the agency is to surveil people, political activists, people who are engaged in democratic political activity, not criminal activity. And so that has got to stop. There has to be, people need to be fired and prosecuted if it is found that they are using the tools and the apparatus of the security state to suppress people's based on their political opinion. Third one is entrapment. Entrapment is huge. This is where they can't arrest you for committing a crime because you haven't committed one, so they just decide that they'll manufacture a crime and then stick you with it. And we've seen this most famously with the FBI. In many anti-terrorism cases, they they come up with the plan, they supply the weapons, they supply the money, they find the people that they want to target for the crime, they give them all of the tools and everything they need to do it and convince them to do it, and then they arrest them and say, ha, that person had a terrorist plot. Never mind that it was all cooked up by the FBI from the get-go. That's the extreme end of it. Then there's the low-level end of it, which you see in activist circles, we see in Chicago, I believe, with No NATO, wasn't it? With the No NATO 5, where same thing, you have a police infiltrator, a saboteur who has cooked up these like Molotov cocktails and convinced these young guys that they should get involved in this plot to throw these Molotov cocktails at a protest, and then next thing you know, they're putting them in jail for donkey's years. So what we want to do is make it absolutely illegal to entrap anybody. Is a totally different thing to arrest someone for having committed an actual crime than it is from inventing a crime and facilitating a crime, and everything from conceiving it to actually convincing people, advocating for that crime to occur. Next one. Oh, okay, right. So this is from some other really alarming cases in New Zealand where journalists have been, dozens of journalists apparently have been targeted on a political basis by the government. And some of those cases involved referrals to child and mental health services. So where they're actually coming at people through their children, or trying to put them in a situation where they can be judged unfit mentally, just to try to suppress their legitimate activism or journalism work. So we want to make it really clear. We want to have a public body, an independent body, appointed to review any cases that have been referred to child or mental health services where it involves a known activist or a journalist, or anybody else that's engaged in any type of legitimate political dissent, to ensure that they're not being, that they're not unfairly being referred. Okay, next one. Now this one needs a bit of discussion, because there's been talk about, well, maybe in the course of a normal, ordinary arrest of an actual criminal, maybe there would be some bodily harm inflicted. But more generally, what we're trying to do is to stop these police and these private agencies from physically harming their targets, which they absolutely do, and physically interfering with them. Number 6, we want to ban experimental weapons. So there has been proof come out into the public arena that there has been weapons testing of experimental weapons on activists and on journalists. We believe that experimental weapons should never ever be tested on human beings. It is despicable, and it needs to be absolutely outlawed. So then the next one, number 7, is information warfare. Now we've seen this from, I believe, NDAA provisions in the United States said that the government could actively propagandize the US public, that they actually made it legal for them to. And we see this also happening in New Zealand. So that has to stop. Lobbyists who are planted in the media as expert opinions must disclose all financial ties. They cannot just pretend to be a journalist or pretend to be an independent commentator if they are in fact on a payroll, be it for military or for government or for whoever else. That must be disclosed. There should be no propaganda, legal propaganda in New Zealand or anywhere else in the world, in our opinion. Number 8 is probably the most upsetting to me. It's a very recent one. We have discovered that the New Zealand government is keeping surveillance databases on children and on minors, and then retaining that information. So, some 12-year-old skips class, now it's in his permanent surveillance record, or her. That's just completely despicable. So we want to outright ban data harvesting of children. Fair enough if you need like your health records, fine, but surveillance records, no person under the age of 18 should be subjected to surveillance by the state. We know in the case of Keith Locke that the government in New Zealand actually surveilled him from the time that he was 8 years of age. that is completely unconscionable to have security intelligence service records for an 8-year-old. It's disgusting, and it has to stop. So then the following have been suggested but not ratified. Guys, are we wanting to ratify these points today? I think from my discussion with Kim last week, Kim was saying that these points need to apply to, okay, so we have a phase 2 plan, which is to create a digital bill of human rights. And this is a global initiative that it's been a dream of Kim since 2014. Perfect. So that's a plan that we've talked about having, like Larry Lessig and like some other really amazing legal minds get on board along with EFF and some of the other big organizations to draft a like hardcore digital bill of human rights that might take us up to a year, we're estimating, to actually put together. Some of the things that we have talked about for that, you can add cyber war to the list. That was something that Kim was talking about pretty extensively last week, is that now that we've seen the type of tools that are in use through the WikiLeaks Vault 7 releases, for example, we need to start regulating the use of those tools because they are dangerous and the way that they're being used is dangerous. And we're now seeing them escape their masters and make it into the public realm. We need to do something about regulating that. So regulating cyber warfare should definitely be on that list. We talked about with Laurie Love and Barrett Brown, we talked about encryption as a human right. We also talked, which is true that it's the right to not self-incriminate by being forced to hand over passwords, but more that the governments and corporations should not be able to restrict the use of encryption. They should not be able to interfere with encryption and prevent this overarching agenda that I've written about in the past, where the government wants use of things that it does not want the public to have use of. The government wants to enjoy protections that the citizens can't enjoy. And while in some cases that might be acceptable, in the terms of privacy, I'm sorry, but it's actually not. Everybody deserves privacy. There is a fundamental right to privacy, and encryption is one way that we can protect our privacy when our governments rob us of it. So we cannot let them take encryption as well. We need that tool, and that tool must be protected. And then we have mass surveillance, right? So mass surveillance is like the ultimate warrantless like offense against an entire population, and that was the most critical aspect of the Snowden disclosures, was that entire populations were being surveilled wholesale, and we have got to stop that. So we need to forbid indefinite storage of data, and we need to forbid collection on entire populations. So one of the things that we've seen in New Zealand recently, I wrote a piece that's up on spinbin.co.nz where I analysed the speech notes of the new director of the GCSB, New Zealand's NSA. And in it, he talked about the number of collections they had, which I believe was like into the thousands. But then the number of orders that they had was like maybe double digits. And the reason that is because they're now getting single warrants to surveil an entire geographic area. Like they can get a warrant on a suburb or on a city and surveil that entire area under one warrant. That is a form of mass surveillance. That warrant isn't worth the paper that it's written on if they're applying it to that many people or to that large an area. And then I can see number 11 that we have here is to ban private corporations and businesses from spying on anyone. Okay, guys, what I want to do, because I want to wrap this anti-spy bill up in the next couple of weeks, I would like it if you guys could remove provisions 9, 10, 11 and actually separate them into a different Etherpad, please, a different pirate pad. Which will become the basis for the global, the digital bill of human rights. And for now, we'll keep the focus on the anti-spy bill, but then we'll be able to come to that once we've wrapped this up. Okay, so what do I want from you guys, the public, today? Because we're actually due to finish in 2 minutes, but I'm really glad that we've actually got to show you this bill. So what I would like is for the people who are watching so far and who have clicked on the link to put in any thoughts that you have that pertain specifically to this anti-spy bill. Anything that you can think of that we have missed so far above, or anything that you have to say about what is above, and we will review it later. So how these pads work is that we have 2 copies of the pads. So this is what is called the chaos pad. I'm not sure if Ray covered this off with you, but the chaos pad is where anyone in the world can write whatever it is that they want to into this pad. And then our awesome team of clever admins will sift through it and decide what needs further discussion, and we still do everything transparently, but this is the pad that you can just write all of your thoughts and anything that you want to say onto, and then the other pad is what will be the actual bill framework. I'm being told it would be very nice if we could wrap it up on time. Okay, maybe like 5 more minutes. So the other thing that we can do is we can actually leave this pad up at this link so that people who, cool, thank you, unnamed, so that people who view this stream, the playback throughout the week, can still actually come to this address. And so we'll actually post it in the description of the video as well. And then you can put your thoughts on this throughout the week, and then we can review them next week at next week's event. Cool, you guys? Speak up. Tell me your thoughts.
Do you mind, Suzie? As you may have seen, Kitty Hundal, who's one of our pirate helpers, have saved revisions of the pad continually while we have been working. So it's easy to step back in time to fix something that might happen. And when you now leave this open for the public over time, it is important that you have somebody monitoring it and saving revisions every now and then. And maybe, you know, spot the pearls in the public's, you know, the text that they put in, and make sure that it gets into the shadow pad where only you, the pros, have access. So that's the whole part of the thinking.
Cool. Okay, awesome. And just quickly, I'll just show people. So this is the very beginnings of the format of the bill, is the statement for where it will apply, where it's being submitted to, what it is, which is the Anti-Spy Bill 2017, the purpose of the bill, and then the contents. We have the short title. Schedule 1 amendments is where we'll be amending the existing pieces of legislation and actually referencing the exact passages and where they come from that we want to remove. And then the specific provisions that we want to include into the spy bill itself, which are the principles that we have just discussed above. So this is the general framework, and over the next 2 to 3 weeks, you will get to see this be fleshed out more and more into something tangible. But for now, you can see the beginnings of it. So I'm very, very pleased that we've made it this far. This is really cool. Now everyone's been introduced to, you know, the methodology of how we will work together to craft this. So, and I'd also like to put a shout out too, if any of you guys are legal beagles, if you have, like, if you're a law student, if you have some kind of expertise in this realm, if you have worked before on legislation, I know there's some awesome Aussies that have reached out to me that were involved with Senator Scott Ludlam, then Senator Scott Ludlam of the Australian Green Party. They did put a act and, or they submitted a bill, I think back in 2012 or 2013, to try to counter some of these issues. Those types of people, we would love to hear from you. If you are interested in becoming a part of drafting this bill and becoming a mod or an admin on our team, or providing us with some expertise, that would be great. We do intend to reach out to people like the New Zealand Law Society and others and give them an opportunity to contribute, the Human Rights Commission, Privacy or Transparency International and those types of people. But yeah, now you'll be able to see this really take shape, and hopefully we can make it something very real in the coming years. It's so necessary. Okay, last thoughts from you guys, and then we'll wrap up. Anyone want to say anything? Speak up. Thank you for sticking with us, Cian.
Thank you, guys. I just wanted to say, well, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Cian for popping in on such short notice. This is extremely exciting, and especially this part when we got to work on the pad and see the bill and see that it works. And I hope that we'll use this in the coming days, you know, and let people play around. We'll try to help you find some good people that are academics or whatnot, and see if that will help. And especially, I look forward to the international or global part of all of this. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Ray said, and also something that I'd like to plug right now, sort of related to this, is with Pirate Parties International, we're really trying to get this kind of global activist movement growing, like within pirate movement, but you know, Internet Party is obviously part of that also. And yeah, we're starting to meet monthly. We have a meeting tomorrow, actually, for just global activists and members of Pirate Parties International. And you're all welcome to join us. It'll be 4 p.m. Central European time. I'm not sure what time that is in New Zealand. I mean, time zones are tricky, right? But yeah, it would be really cool to, you know, come together on something like this even, and get some of the pirates interested in working on, you know, a global anti-spying bill, and even just getting people talking like you've been doing.
I'm starting to think that together we're unstoppable. Oh, no, I'm hearing actually our old media team coordinator from Occupy. Together we're unstoppable, a new world is possible.
It's true. It's true.
Cian, have you got any last words that you want to say for us?
Yeah, this is really great stuff to see. I've never actually witnessed a bill in the process of being made on the internet from a party that's called the internet. So I mean, I was really interested in the idea of like crowdsourcing democracy. I've pretty much heard of what was going on in Finland, but I never really like knew that this thing was kind of taking off in different places. This is amazing. Me and Lisa Ling were sort of serious about like we definitely need to see this stuff crop up in the US, like for sure. I mean, we're the but yeah, speechless.
If you guys want to get involved in it.
Oh yeah, I'm down. I know Lisa's down too. We know a few people who are probably down around here.
Sorry, just got kicked off again. If you guys, I was just saying, if you want to get involved in Internet Party USA, that would be fantastic. Cool. Okay, so I've just got one little announcement too about Internet Party, and then I'll wrap this up. So for a long time, we have had a lot of people saying, but who are your candidates? Who are your candidates? Well, the good news is, and we didn't want to announce it until we had confirmation. The good news is that this week, the Electoral Commission of New Zealand accepted our party list and has ratified our full party list. So yeah, cool. So in a couple of days' time, we will have an actual press conference, an internet press conference. I get asked all the time, how can I be outside of New Zealand and campaign with my team? Well, funnily enough, we're called the Internet Party. So we campaign on the internet. And through the wonders of the internet, I'm in contact with my team constantly. So we will have an online press conference and you will get to meet all of our candidates from our list. You'll see who they are. You'll get to hear about why they support the Internet Party, why they're part of the Update NZ campaign, and why they want to be a part of change in New Zealand. So that will be an exciting event. Hopefully the media will show up. Whether or not they do, we have our own audience and we will keep pushing our own messages and keep working on awesome endeavors like this. So thank you, Cian. It's been so awesome to have you. I respect all of our wonderful whistleblowers so much, and it's amazing for me to get to meet you guys and talk to you. And thank you all of our incredible support team behind the scenes who are just doing amazing work for us every single day. You're awesome and I love you. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who watched us on the various platforms and who is donating to us on our website and volunteering and supporting us. You are awesome. We can't do this without you. This is people-powered democracy, and people is what it's all about. So thank you all, and we will see you next week where we'll have some more awesome guests and we will keep working on this bill and get a little bit closer and a little bit closer to finishing it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night and take care.